But the stakes are so high, Mr. Speaker, because of the way that you've lined this up. Get the repeal and replace done first, then move on to tax reform. You've got a very aggressive timeline trying to get something out on this health care plan by Easter, and then moving on to tax reform to try to get that done by August. If you have any slip-ups, what happens to tax reform?
Yeah, we're actually on schedule. The Senate and the House laid out for the president an aggressive 200-day schedule. We knew we couldn't do it all in 100 days because the Senate has to approve all these cabinet members. So it's an aggressive 200-day schedule that we worked with the president on. He said, I love it. Make sure you put infrastructure in this as well. And so we're working off of that schedule that we all agreed to. And so, yes, it's aggressive, but that's because there's big problems. We made promises as to what we would do to solve those problems, and now we're in the middle of delivering on those promises. And so, yes, it is important that we get this done so that we can do tax reform, because this bill also takes out about $900 billion of tax increases. The Obamacare tax increases are taken out, which makes it $900 billion easier to reform the tax code afterwards.
Yeah.
That's why this is really important.
Look, some people see this as a bigger tax cut than anything, obviously, because you've taken out certain taxes.
It's about a $1 trillion tax cut. This is about a $1 trillion tax cut.
And I get that. But wouldn't it have been easier to do tax reform first? Look at these markets, up 15% since Election Day. The business community, individuals want to see tax reform done. How do you know you're going to be able to get to tax reform? Look at all the issues you're facing right now with getting this completed.
Because it's one of the highest priorities we have. Our committees, frankly, weren't ready to be able to write tax reform in this space of time. They're getting ready now. They're still working on it. And more importantly, it would have been $1 trillion more difficult to do tax reform had we done that first. That's a big deal. $1 trillion, just to give you in your mind a perspective, that's 10 percentage points on rates for businesses. So our blueprint, the House blueprint, it takes the corporate rate from 35 to 20. $1 trillion is the 20 to 30 difference. This is how big that is. And so taking tax reform with a bigger $1 trillion number in it makes it really hard to do. That's why doing this first makes tax reform that much easier to accomplish.
You said 20% in the corporate tax rate, and Donald Trump has been saying 15%. I think now the
we love 15. But again, here's the point. We also know that the left does not believe in what we're trying to do on tax reform. They don't want us to lower tax rates. They don't want to go to a territorial system. They don't believe in these things. And so we have to use reconciliation for that as well. That means 51 votes. And if you're going to use reconciliation, this bill has to be revenue neutral. We believe we can have a revenue neutral tax reform bill with a corporate tax rate of 20%, but we don't think 15 gets there. I would love to do 15%. If we can do 50%, we'll do 15%. But the bill has to be revenue neutral for us to avoid a filibuster. So I love this conversation.
Yeah.
It gets a little wonky. It's a little detailed. It kind of confuses people. But the point I'm trying to say is, there's a reason why we're making the decisions we're making, and it is so that we can actually deliver on our promises. It's so that we can actually do what we said we would do. It's so that we can take the president's agenda, the things he talked about in the campaign, the things we also ran out in the campaign, and actually get it done as quickly as possible through the legislative process. This, by the way, for Congress is lightning speed, I would say, getting tax reform, repealing and replacing Obamacare. We're defederalizing an entitlement and capping it, getting rid of another entitlement and replacing it with a Republican tax policy. Then we rebuild the military. Then we go and rewrite the tax code for economic growth. It's a pretty tall agenda.
It's a very tall agenda, and I think everybody recognizes that. You're doing a lot, and you've got a small window of opportunity before the next set of elections. Is there any scenario that you can think of where tax reform is not announced in 2017?
No, we will get tax reform done. You know why?
Even though you've got all this pressure from within your own party on the conservative right, that is saying we are not going to vote for this. If you lose 2 Republicans, this bill collapses.
Yeah, did you ask me about tax reform or
I'm talking about health care and and then tax reform. My first question was, is there any scenario that tax reform does not happen in 2017? You said no, and my follow-up was, even though you've got this pressure for health care, because that will hold everything up if this collapses.
It makes tax reform a lot harder. It makes it more difficult. But no, we all know that we have to get tax reform if we want to get economic growth. If we want to get out of the slug that we're in with the lowest, smallest peacetime expansion since World War II, we must do tax reform. Our members get that. Our members are having a vibrant debate about how to do tax reform, but there isn't a Republican that I know that does not believe that we should do tax reform. Look, I was chair of the Ways and Means Committee. I've written a lot of tax bills. I've been here for a lot of tax laws. I know what we will get to consensus on how to do tax reform. We have a bill in the House that we strongly believe in. We think it's the best way to go.
Yeah.
Others had different ideas. That's what the legislative process is all about. That's
Sure.
what negotiations are about. But there isn't a Republican that I've heard of that is not for doing tax reform. But I like the idea of making it $1 trillion easier to do tax reform than not. That's what we're trying to accomplish.
Does that revenue neutrality come in because of a border adjustment tax on tax reform?
Well, border adjustment obviously helps it meet revenue neutrality and get a 20% rate. If you don't, let's put it this way, border adjustment gets you $1 trillion of base broadening from outside the domestic tax base. If you don't border adjust, then you have to get that $1 trillion from within the U.S. domestic business tax base.
Yeah.
And what we find is you really can't get all that, so you can't get a 20% rate. Border adjustment gets you a 20% rate. You don't do border adjustment. We're mid to high 20s, we think. And that's not good because the industrial average tax rate for businesses is 23%. We can't meet 23% if we don't do this.
Mr. Speaker, real quick.
That's one of our concerns.
Is it going to be retroactive to January 20th, 17, the tax plan?
I don't know the answer to that yet. If it's $1 trillion harder to get this done, then that makes it harder to do. So this bill hasn't been written yet, so it's way too premature to say. But let me put you this way: we want to do that.
Yeah.
We believe for economic growth, rate cuts. I watch this. You go back and read the books about Reagan. Art Laffer's told me the story a million times. Right. When you delay tax rate reductions for later, you're actually delaying economic growth. You're delaying decision making. So the last thing we want to do is delay growth on the margin that would occur with rate cuts.
Mr. Speaker, good to have you on the program today. Thanks so much.
You bet. Take care.
Speaker Paul Ryan joining us.